Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome everyone to the group chat brought to you by OVERMUGGED. As usual, I'm your host Daryl, and with me today is Shalyn. So Shalyn, can you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Hi, okay, so my name is Shalyn. I have been, tutoring for about 4 years now, and I actually tutor math, specializing in JC H1, H2 math. I'm also an undergrad in NUS right now. I'm studying engineering. I'm in my last year, going to graduate May 2021, about there. And before NUS, I was actually in SA. And before that, I was in St. Nick's. Yeah. So maybe just a bit deeper, right? In SA, my subject combination was PCME, very normal. And in St. Nick's, I also took a very, very normal subject combi, which is just like double science, physics and chem, and pure geog, combined history, SS, higher Chinese, which I just passed, and Chinese, and of course I took E-math and A-math lah. Yeah.
So for those of you that are not aware, Shalyn's actually OVERMUGGED's H2 math tutor. So she's the one that's been uploading all the notes for H2 math. If you go and look at it, it's really pretty good in my opinion. I wish I had those when I was studying for my A-levels, especially for the vectors one. Okay, I think today's session is really going to be focused and we're going to dive in deep for H2 math itself. I think H2 math is really something that most students will be taking, assuming you're in the science stream. And for students that are even in the art stream itself, you'll be taking H1 math. So I think there's a lot that we can discuss. And I think I'll start off with this more overarching question. So Shalyn, how is H2 math like for our listeners out there that are not yet in JC? Maybe they are in O-level this year. And what should they expect in JC math itself?
Okay, so I think I want to caveat this by saying that I think a lot of people have a misconception of H2 math. I think everyone thinks that it's very, very difficult. And I'm not gonna lie, I think it is, but only because of the time frame for JC. Like we only have 2 years to study so many topics, right? And it's not just H2 math, you have other subjects as well, I understand. But I feel like if we were given more time during JC, I don't think H2 math is very difficult. Yeah. Okay, so maybe I talk about H2 math a bit. H2 math is split into 2 parts. There's pure math and there's statistics. So pure math is more of, I guess the name says it all, right? It's purely math. It's just talking about mathematical concepts. And you have topics like graphing techniques, functions, summation of series. And then I guess the more well-known ones would be vectors, complex numbers, and differentiation and integration, which most students do not like. And then we have the stats part of it. And stats is really about, I guess, collecting, but we don't do the collecting, right? Or we analyze data, yeah? And it's more about probability, the different distributions that we have, and hypotesting and correlation and regression, which the previous year A-level people did not do. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how this year's people find it. And I guess we also have, I'll talk a bit about H1 math, right? And what's the difference between H2 and H1 math? So H1 math has the same stats portion as H2 math. So everything from statistics is just copy and paste from H2 to H1 math. But the big difference is that H1 math, right, cuts down a lot, and I mean a lot, on the pure math portion. Yeah, it is almost as good as you taking A math, but at A levels. And I guess the main portion for H1 pure math will be differentiation and integration. And it's not even the same level as H2 math differentiation and integration. It's very, very simple, I would say. And there's also the graphing technique and exponential / log function part of it, which is also very, very simple. Yeah. So a lot of people always ask me, like my students always ask me, like, should I take H1 or H2 math, right? I think a good guide would be, if you did well in A math in O levels, right? I would say go ahead and take H2 math. Yeah. And by well, I mean probably B3, A2 above, right? You're quite safe. You can go and take H2 math. But if you you did not take A math in A levels, right? I think you just go and take H1 math lah. You will really die if you if you try to take H2 math and you have no A math foundation. Yeah. So the jump from O level to A level, right? I would say it's very big. It's super steep. I don't know about you, Daryl, but even for myself, I found the gap very, very big when I went from O level to A level. Yeah. And I guess the big difference is that it's way more in depth. So even when we look at, okay, so I'll talk about a few topics lah. Like for vectors, okay, in O levels, you actually do 2D vectors, 2 dimensions. That means you're only dealing with your X and Y axis. Suddenly in A levels, right, we introduce this thing called the Z axis. So everything becomes 3D. And because in 2 dimensions, right, everything is flat. It's like a piece of paper like that, right? You can only go maybe like right, left, and up, down. But then suddenly in A levels, we introduce the 3rd axis, making everything 3D. That means that we have stuff like planes, because now instead, right, you can go left, right, up, down. You can go forward and backward also. Yeah. And I think that is a struggle for a lot of students. Vectors is like, I think, the most hated topic at A levels. But also you start to see like a trend, right? Like differentiation and integration, everything becomes suddenly so much harder than before. It becomes so much more in depth. And even for stuff like probability and graphing techniques, right? Yeah. So the feedback that I get from my students is that it's really much, much harder. In fact, one of my students said that for her school, right, she's in YIJC. She actually, the department actually complained that there's not enough people taking H2 math this year, like the incoming J1 batch. Everyone's opting for H1 math, and I think it's because of what they've been hearing about H2 math, that it's very difficult. But yeah, okay, so maybe I share some study tips to help our students like not struggle or die in H2 math so much, right?
Shalyn, before you go on to the study tips, right, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more, right? In terms of like, of course, most of the students listening, you probably take E-math. I mean, that's compulsory. Let's just assume you also take A-math. So what is the reasonable expectation as you move from O level with E-math and A-math versus when you first start school in J1 and you start looking at H2 math? So we can share a bit more on that. Then I'll also share about my experience for myself in terms of how I felt for the jump from O level to A level.
Okay, so I don't know about you, Daryl, but like when I went to JC, right, I really started to find everything super duper difficult. For H2 math, okay, I'm a math person lah. Like I like maths. So I didn't find the jump that steep for math itself. Okay. I scored A in, I guess I've been scoring A for math from like my whole life lah. So when I went to JC and then like my first ever H2 math test, right, I think I scored a C or something, right? I was actually very shocked because I thought that I knew the concepts very well. I thought that I understood and I could apply and I practiced enough. Then suddenly come back like, yeah, it's not what I expected lah. I didn't meet my expectation. Then I realized that maybe it's the way that I study. Yeah, but I'll talk more about that later. Yeah, maybe you can share about your experience first.
Okay, for me, right, I feel like I'm a math person too. So I'm more like a science and math person. So when I took the leap from O level to A level itself, right, I was expecting that I would do okay for math because ever since like even from primary school until secondary school, it just comes naturally. So as much as A math had like your binomial theorem, differentiation, integration, those, and then also like trigo identities, and it gets to a point where it gets a bit like, what is this? Is this even math? I could still figure it out with sufficient practice. But the thing I realized with H2 math is that the moment you start lagging behind, it's almost impossible to catch up because it's a build-up process. So eventually, because I wasn't paying attention in class, I was sleeping, right? Then the moment I missed out on one foundational chapter, I think it just kept accumulating until a point whereby even if I sit in a lecture and I try to listen, right, I cannot absorb anything because I don't have my foundation grounded. So for those out there that are listening, if you think your math is good, you've never been struggling, I'll just like to give you a warning to don't take H2 math too easily lah. So I think like what Shalyn says, it's also not so much that it's impossible to master. It's just that the time spent that you have, that 2 years for A-level, is comparatively short compared to the 4 years you had to master your O-level syllabus. So the expectations there will be quite different. JC is meant to be a pre-university kind of junior college, right? So it's actually supposed to be university, but to prep you for it. So in terms of the content that you will be expected to see, it will be a lot more complex compared to what you see at O-levels. So I think managing your expectations early on will be very important. So if you think you can easily get by an O-level, then you should really change the way you think about things and then prepare yourself a bit more for A-levels and H2 math. Okay, Shalyn, I think just now you were touching on how you wanted to share some study tips. I think that's what most of our listeners out there will be interested in. So I just get you to go ahead and share what are some ways we can learn H2 math better.
Okay, wait, but okay, I feel like we've been like shading on H2 math, right? But I just want to say that, okay, math, okay, to me it's a very enjoyable topic. Like it's my favorite subject because compared to all the other subjects, right, I feel like math is the only one where there's only one right answer. So it's like a puzzle like that. Every time I'm solving questions, right, I treat it like a puzzle. So I will write out all my clues, correct? And then I start to piece everything together. That's what I like about math, okay? Yeah, so with that being said, right, I think we all know that for math, practice makes perfect lah, huh? Okay, you cannot siam the practice part of math. It is impossible to do well without practicing. Like I must say lah, okay, I've never seen a student do well without practicing, let's say the whole TYS before they go into the exam, okay? But it is very important, okay, that you be careful to not blindly practice. What I mean by this is, please don't just like try and then you don't know, right? And then you just go and refer to the answer, thinking that you'll be able to, I guess, digest or understand from that. It's a very bad habit. I realize that a lot of students have, to just refer to the answer and then just think like, oh, okay, I understand already. But actually, you don't know how to apply. And that is the tricky part about A-level math, is the application part. Because there's so many different ways that they can test you, right? And I guess in O-level, it's a bit easier in a sense that you sort of know the different question types, or they're more straightforward with it, right? They will just tell you differentiate this, or it's always the same few things, right? Is this an increasing function? Then you know, okay, you differentiate. If it's more than 0, it's an increasing function, that kind of thing. But for A-level math, it's like a whole story. Yeah, they'll tell you like, oh, there's this plank, and then after that it's supported by this beam, and then after that, there's this vector A, B, C. Yeah, then you have to start to imagine, and then you have to start to apply, and it's just very, very different. Or if we don't even talk about vectors, we talk about like differential equations. Suddenly you have to start to imagine the whole scenario, like, oh, the rate of change is this, then how do I craft my equation, And that being said, right, like that is tough enough. You then have to start to think, which integration technique should I use? So it's impossible to do without practicing, with your heart and soul, I would say. Yeah, so I guess my first tip, right, would be please take the time after your teacher go through, let's say in school, right, the teacher go through the entire lecture, right? Don't just like, oh, okay, my teacher finished, so I will go past it already. Please take the time to go and read through your notes again and understand the topic. And something that I like to do with my students is to explain, like a bit about why do we even have this topic? Like why there's vectors exist? Or okay, I think a good example is why there's complex number exist. I think this is a question that I've received a lot throughout the years. Complex numbers is like, it just came out of nowhere. You realize it's about, okay, I don't know if you remember, but it's about imaginary number I equals to -1. So who in the world, right, go and make this imaginary number, okay? Why does it even exist? So there's this mathematician, like I just give a bit of context. There's this mathematician that actually realized that, you realize when you do quadratic equations, and some quadratic equations you just cannot solve, right? You have to do the x equals to minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a, right? That whole equation, right? And then sometimes in your square root, you get a negative number. So this mathematician realized that you cannot square root negative numbers. And that's why he went to make imaginary number I. Yeah, so that you can start to solve all these equations and have this imaginary number I there, which equals to square root of -1. So yeah, I think a bit of context into the different topics definitely helps. At least it helps me and my students. Yeah. And then the next tip would be during our practice, right? Take the time to understand the question. Like I said, write everything out like it's a puzzle like that, and everything in the question is like your clues. Yeah. And for vectors, it's very, very important to draw it out. Yeah. And like I said, tip number 3, try not to refer to the answer sheet so much. Try and attempt it yourself as much as possible. And if let's say you did refer to the answer sheet, right, you can always take a similar question and then see if you can reproduce the answer or you can get the final answer. Yeah, I think that helps a lot, which leads me to my next point of, testing yourself. So with my students, I always like to test them. I always give mini test one every week. As in almost every week, I'll be like half an hour is allocated to doing a test, and then I'll go through on the spot. Because I think it's very important to not just test yourself, but time yourself as well. In the exam, a lot of people struggle with time management. And it's very common actually for H2 math people to not be able to complete the exam on time. Yeah. So maybe I just give a bit of guideline. Yeah. For at A levels, right, for H2 math, you have approximately, or not approximately, you have exactly 1.65 minutes to do for each mark. So you can start to gauge yourself for each question, how long should I take? Yeah. And this is like me having a counted time to go and check your answers and everything. Yeah. And I guess the last tip, right, is play to your strengths. Like I said, there's no time to waste in H2 math paper, or I guess in any paper, right, at H2 level. So for me, I always do all the questions that I know I confirm can do first. Then the rest of the questions that I don't really know how to do, right? I mean, I don't believe I'm that dumb okay? So if I cannot do it, probably my peers cannot do it also, right? Like there's a chance okay? So I will just not do the question first and then I come back to it later and slowly think. I realize that a lot of people like to waste time and think, and then in the end, no time. Yeah.
Based on what you say, I mean, I teach science, so I can't exactly relate to all the more math related advice. But something that I really, really can relate to, right, is the practice. During my group tuitions, I always have a practice because after you learn, right, learning is one part of it only. You need to really apply it to a question. And when you apply it to the question, you really see so many other variations of how that knowledge can be used to solve questions. So honestly, if you are listening and you do your revision by looking at your textbook, okay, and you're only revising based on the notes itself, right, that won't be sufficient. You need the notes and you also need the practice so that the application process help you level up your understanding. Okay. And adding on to what Shalyn says, it's not just practice, but it's also practice within the set time frame. Because exams are a game, you have a limited time period. So for all my group tuitions, my practices, there is a time limit set according to like what you said, time allocation based on how much each mark is worth. So I think that's something that we should all pay attention to. For myself, I think I employed a similar strategy for my H2 math when I did it, which was doing the questions that I knew I could do first. So like I know the chapter is not something that I'm good at. Like for example, like complex numbers itself was one of my weaker topics. I'll try to leave it to the end because I know I can do my statistics question quite well because that one's a bit more logical with all the hypo testing. So those questions I tend to score. So I know that at least I'll secure myself a minimum grade before I try to hit those questions that can potentially get me that A. So I think those are all tips that are not only relevant for math, but is relevant throughout all subjects. Being smart in an exam. So those are just some exam tips. But Shalyn, I think your sharing has been super helpful. For students out there that are listening, right, really go and take down what Shalyn has said. I think those really make a difference for your whole learning journey for your A-level math itself. Okay, moving on to my next question, Shalyn, because you yourself, you're an engineering major in NUS. So I just wanted to find out, how does H2 math affect uni courses?
Okay, so I think it's important to say that you don't need H2 math to go into business because I think a lot of people want to go into business, right? H1 math is good enough for business, thankfully. But for H2 math, right, what is needed will be for engineering. So all engineerings, unfortunately, you need H2 math. Some of the sciences, you will need H2 math. And definitely, if you want to go and study math, you need at least H2 math lah. Yeah, but I think it really, okay, so for me, right, math is a very important topic, and not just because I'm an engineer. I think it helps me, I have a lot of appreciation lah for the mathematical concepts. Yeah, which is why math is also one of my favorite subjects, right? And I think that it's the easiest subject to score among all the other subjects because, like I said, right, there's only one correct answer. And to me, it's very methodological. Like you do this way means like it's probably this way lah. There's a few methods, but at the end of the day, math is like, it's very white and black one. There's no gray area, which is how I feel for, sorry to say, art subject or even chemistry, right? I really struggled with chemistry because it's very like airy-fairy, right? Like that to me, there's so many different answers that I'm not sure, how to really answer sometimes lah.
I can relate to that, in a sense that math, there's just one fixed way of doing, like there's one answer compared to say arts. There are so many variations in terms of what constitute, there's no correct answer there. For myself, I took H2 math, then I went on to uni. So I did, my course is more media and marketing related, but even for those courses, I had to use H2 math. So a lot of my peers, they came from humans background because in mass comm, like a lot more like language and stuff. But then there was a module called data analytics because even in marketing nowadays, we involve a lot of big data and a lot of calculations. So that's where all the hypo testing comes in, understanding how to manipulate your data sets to derive meaningful insights. So even as a media student myself, I had to apply whatever I learned in H2 math. And I think I was the only few that took H2 math in my whole cohort. So I actually did very well. I got an A for that mod. But it's mainly based on whatever I learned in H2 math. So a lot of my peers were like, well, what is this? But then I could do it mainly because of H2 math itself. So for listeners, I spoke a lot about math. We talked about the difference between H1, H2, how to master math, So I want to go down to my favorite segment of the week, which is the dilemma of the week, okay? So let's say, right, if the student finish O-level, okay, E-math, A-math is around the A to B3 range, okay? Will you recommend the student to take H2 math or H1 math?
I would say go for H2 math. Yeah, because okay, to me, if you're in the A to B3 range, right, means that you sort of know what's going on lah. Yeah. And the minute, okay, to be honest, the minute we all enter JC, right, be it you score A1, A2, B3 in O-level, right, you're sort of on equal footing already. Because it's just that difficult, sad to say. Yeah, like even those students that score A1, right, can come back and struggle on certain topics when they go to for H2 math lah. Yeah. Unless you tell me that you are an art student or maybe you want like a super, okay, but even if you are a science student and you take, for instance, physics and econs, you still need math. So why not just take the H2, right? Because it can help those subjects as well. But unless you're an art student, then maybe H1 math is okay. But probably if you're an art student at O-level, you are probably going to be an art student at A-levels, right? So you will probably, you can gauge yourself lah. What is your level like lah?
To something Emmanuel shared in one of the previous podcasts, which is to play to your strength. So for me, right, if it's my recommendation, like Shalyn, I think outlined very clearly that if you're already taking physics and econs, which requires a good mastery of math, I think there's little reason for you to not take H2 math. Anyway, bigger picture, is your math related to your other H2 subjects? And also, how does it affect your uni path? Okay, but I think overall this podcast has been super informative. It sort of brought back nightmares from JC about how I was learning math. Oh my God, when you talk about the imaginary number, I was like, oh my God, I remember learning that. Okay, but I hope yes. Okay, but in all honesty, H2 math was one of the more enjoyable subjects for myself when I was in JC. The one I hated the most was still PW, but that's something we will speak about on another day. Okay, so Shalyn, I'd like to thank you for your time. Do you have any concluding statement you want to shout out to all our listeners?
I think like I said, right, I feel like this whole podcast we sort of shaded on H2 math. But I just want to re-emphasize, right, that I myself, I really enjoy doing H2 math lah. Yeah. And I'm sure that there are a lot of listeners out there that enjoy math as well. I think it's important, especially at an A-level stage, right, that you learn to appreciate the subjects that you're learning. Because if not, right, you will have a very, very hard time during your A-level years. Yeah. I've seen people who really struggle, and then after like they get back their A-level result and it's not up to par, right, they have so much PTSD that they don't want to retake the A-level paper. So they choose to go to like I guess a private uni, or they choose an easier in a sense to them, easier path out lah. Yeah. So don't be scared of the subjects that you're studying at A levels. Just really take the time to understand it. And of course, I'm very sure that if you need help, extra help, even if it's not in the form of tuition, right, just go to your school tutors, and I'm sure that they'll be more than happy to help you if you approach them.
Okay, so what I really want to say here is that sometimes students ask me, Joe, why am I studying this? Why do I need to know this? You know, like, why do we need to study complex numbers? You know, some of it doesn't make sense. I mean, that's true. You might not even apply. I never applied logarithm ever in my life, okay? But what it challenges you to do is to sharpen your thinking, to really train your brain to solve problems, not so much just the math question itself. So you need to see every part of your educational journey as a challenge to upgrade the way you think about things, and also to open your perspective to more knowledge. So while the education system is not perfect by any means, it does pushes you to think at a higher level. And I think that itself trains you to be a more intelligent human being, in that sense, that you're able to see things in more perspective and also be able to solve problems. So those are some real world application that the value in which the different subjects that you take gives you. So be it math itself, be it problem solving, or you take an art subject and then you need to learn on how to work on your arguments. Sometimes what you study is not what's important, but it's the skill set that you build and the resilience, okay, in terms of how you build your mentality that really translate to the future itself. Okay, so for all our listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Remember to follow us on Spotify. And if you have any subjects that you love us to any topics that you want us to discuss, drop us a PM on Instagram or answer our usual Insta story as I post the question on, hey, what is the next topic that we should discuss on? So look forward to the next episode. Shalyn, thank you so much for taking your time out today.
Thank you, Daryl.
It sound right, boy.